What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds since the 1st of June 2026, going all the way up to the 1st of June 2025. And in today's video, I'm going to be going through how learning by experience and just doing things has ultimately shaped how I've been moving today and also going on into the future. Because there's so many things that I've learned and heard from, different people in terms of, hey, you should do XYZ and you should do this. And yes, some of those things work. And that also means that you need to take the approach of saying, hey, these things do work, but I also need to be able to filter the information that is, set in terms of what it is that I want to ultimately achieve. And that means that each and every single day, I'm taking, so much information and I'm compressing it and asking and filtering as well to say, hey, are these the things that I ultimately need to learn? And if that is true, then I ultimately need to execute on that. But you learn so many things simply just by doing. And I've said this countless times, in throughout my videos, that most of the things that you learn through experience, you have to learn by actually doing the thing. Because it's so much that someone can tell you, hey, do XYZ and you'll get this result, but just so you have to figure it out for yourself and consuming the right amount of knowledge as well that ultimately gets you to where you need to go is also super important. And this is something that I've ultimately, taken to stride a lot more recently in terms of, hey, if this information is tailored to in terms of what it is that I ultimately want to do, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to act on it such so I can see if the results yield the same that they did for them, and also make sure that I'm actively learning through experience by actively doing it and getting those reps. Because you can only learn so much from reading and trying to figure out how do you do XYZ, but you learn so much by actually going deeper than ever before and just getting the reps in and actively building the machine as well. And this is something that I've ultimately have been doing a lot more recently, just diving back into building the machine and going super deeper than ever before in terms of making sure that I'm focusing a lot more on production in the production quadrant, and making sure that each and every single day I'm producing, but also making sure I'm protecting what is allowing me to then produce. And that means each and every single day I'm gathering as much information as possible, then also using feedback loops to ultimately refine what are the things that I ultimately need to do on a day to day. Because if you don't run those feedback loops that I've ultimately, spoken about, a couple times in terms of building the machine that feedback loops ultimately run off of. And you can even check out yesterday's video that, that is there, where I basically dive into what tools ultimately go into powering this feedback loop and how to ultimately structure it as well. Because in as much as you can talk about these things and also strategize and plan, the action part of it ultimately yields the results, and actively learning by doing the thing. And this has been so true throughout my entire journey that there have been times where I've had to learn things simply by just doing, even if someone said no, don't do it. And it's somewhat like like how a baby, you tell a baby, hey, don't touch the stove. Ultimately, you can't prevent the baby's curiosity from just touching the stove, and sometimes they do touch the stove and their hands get burnt or their finger gets burnt. But ultimately understanding that your finger needs to get burnt in order to understand the lesson and also understand the value of what it is that you're doing on a day to day is so important. And that ultimately comes as a result of ultimately doing the thing and sharpening the tool set that allows you to ultimately scale whatever it is that you're doing on a day to day. And that means, if you hear a nugget that, rings true in your mind after you've made the decision that, hey, throughout my experiences, this is aligned with what it is that I'm trying to go for, and it makes sense, then you ultimately implement that and you add it to your execution there, and you ultimately make sure that, you're doing the thing, then getting those results and also tracking those results as well. Because you can only do so much, but also understanding that, in order to do more, you need to go through that trial and error period where you're just getting the reps and building each and every single day, such so that you're making sure that you're moving the needle forward. And sometimes there's a plateau where you're just doing the same thing over and over, and then you realize that, hey, we ultimately need to switch things up. We need to find it within ourselves to basically understand what it is that we're doing, such so that we can ultimately 10x the output. Because there are points in time where you may realize that, hey, I've been doing the same thing over and over and over, but is it, constantly, is it ultimately yielding me the results that I'm ultimately seeking over a long period of time, such so that you can then understand that, hey, is this worth continuing, or do I need to necessarily pivot into doing something else that ultimately yields 10x the results that I've been getting in that moment in time. But that ultimately comes from taking the leap of faith and saying, hey, I've got this information, I filtered it, this rings true to my experiences and what I truly believe in, and you block out all the noise and you say, hey, this is true, this rings true, I'm ultimately going to act on it such so that I can build today and also build into the future, and making sure that each and every single day I'm staying true to what it is that I need to do, and also learning as much as possible and being a lifelong learner. Because I think there's so much value in just being a lifelong learner, in terms of, hey, I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can, and also reduce the time from learning to execution, such so that I can gather those data points somewhat close to the limit or closer to the real time execution. So basically, learning something and then implementing it while you're learning, somewhat in effect. And also understanding that the more you can reduce the time from learning to execution, the more you can get done. And this is something that I've ultimately read. I think I mentioned it in yesterday's video, where we only have so much time, so we better move fast in order to get the things that we need to get done, such so that we move with speed and intent, and making sure that we're just doing the thing. Because the faster you're able to then do the thing and ultimately iterate on that, so rapidly iterating on that, the more data points you're then able to gather, and the faster you're then able to move. And that ultimately has been true for me, that the faster I've been able to move, the more I've just been gathering information and then executing on that straight away, almost in real time, has ultimately yielded me to be able to do more things than I have been able to do in that moment in time. But that has ultimately come as a result of gathering those experiences simply by someone saying, if someone tells you then that, hey, you need to do XYZ in order to get this result because it worked for them, just try it out. Just try it out. You never know if it rings true, or if it ultimately gets you the results that you have been seeking. Because you ultimately need to understand as well who you're getting the information from. You need to get the right things that you want from the person that has what you want. And if someone that doesn't have what you want tells you what to do, then you're not going to fully understand what it is that you need to get done, because they themselves don't fully understand the full scope of it. And getting the right information as well, and filtering it and making sure that it rings true through your experiences and also what you want to achieve, and then actively reducing the time from learning to execution, such so that you're learning those experiences. And if you fail, so be it, and if you succeed, that's even great. But just having no expectation on that, to say, hey, I'm going to implement this. If it fails, then good. If it does well, then good. I'm ultimately going to have this neutral, approach to it, just so that, if I have too much expectation that, hey, this is going to work, it's going to 1000% work for me, and it doesn't work, then, hey, I'm going to be crushed. But that is not ultimately going to move the needle forward if I constantly just have that expectation of, hey, this is ultimately going to work each and every single time. Just saying, hey, I know that even if it doesn't work, I'm ultimately going to figure it out. And through that, you're ultimately then able to learn those experiences, and also constantly build, even in the times where it may seem uncertain, that, hey, you don't know what the results are, or you don't know what it looks like into the future. But as long as you're just building each and every single day, things will always fall into place, in my personal opinion. You just have to take the first action, and just take the steps of saying, hey, if someone tells me to touch my hand on the stove and I'll get burnt, I'm going to do it anyways, such so that I learn the lesson. But ultimately, I have to do it in order to learn the lesson. And through that, you ultimately understand what works and what doesn't work. But sometimes you just have to take that lesson of, hey, I'm going to put my hand on the stove, and if I get burnt, then I'm going to take it and I'm going to own it. But as long as I learned that lesson, and I use that as fuel to then build into the future. Because you may say that, hey, this necessarily doesn't work, but in your mind and in your life experiences, because it didn't work that time, you may may be able to, recognize patterns that ultimately allow you to then build something completely new. And that is insane amounts of value, if you ask me. That, hey, it might not have worked for someone else, but because of their mindset and their approach to it, they simply just gave up. But then you, with your life experiences and your character and who you are, you failed at the first hurdle, but you didn't know how good it would get if you simply just continued. And you also just learned the lesson and recognized patterns of, hey, if this didn't work in this specific way, why don't I just, do this in this other way, and then, reinvent something new, if you will, and ultimately try it again. And you never know, it may work, it may also not work, but the most important thing is you have to get those experiences in order to learn and also just move what it is that you're doing on a day to day. And this is something that I've had to learn countless of times, that, hey, I'm just going to try things, and if they work, then good. If they don't work, then also good. I'm going to learn the lesson and ultimately use this as fuel to build into the future. And always just take that neutral approach of, hey, if it works, cool. If it doesn't, then cool. I'm just going to constantly just become a lifelong learner and keep learning and just enjoy the journey as I go along. And if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to check out, my newsletter. It's the first link in the description. And if you want to connect with me, X, LinkedIn, Instagram is just below that. And I will see you guys in the next video.